They make you laugh. They charm every room. Their timing is perfect. Sharp, quick, magnetic. Everyone says, they're so funny. But something about their humor doesn't feel light. Because beneath the punchlines, beneath the teasing smiles, there's a flicker of something deeper, something sad. They joke about being emotionally unavailable. They laugh about not needing anyone. They turn pain into irony and heartbreak into stand-up. It's how they survive. It's how they stay in control. But behind that laughter is a truth they'll never say out loud. Humor isn't just how they connect. It's how they hide. The mask that smiles back. Humor feels safe. It's the only language that doesn't demand vulnerability. When the avoidant cracks a joke, they aren't trying to hurt anyone. They're trying to protect themselves from the feeling of being seen too closely. See, for most people, laughter is a bridge. It draws others closer. It softens tension. It says, I'm open, you can meet me here. But for the avoidant, humor becomes armor. It's the safest way to express emotion without appearing emotional. Because real emotion, the kind that trembles, shakes, and admits that actually hurt, feels like exposure, feels like danger. So instead, they twist the pain. They repackage it. They make it palatable by wrapping it in laughter. A childhood of unpredictability teaches the avoidant one thing. When you make people laugh, they don't hurt you. They like you. They stop asking questions. And that becomes a survival rule. Be funny, not fragile. It's how they learn to exist. In homes where emotions weren't safe, where silence meant tension, and vulnerability meant punishment or rejection. So when they grew up, they mastered it. The art of deflection. They learned to redirect sadness into sarcasm, fear into wit, loneliness into punchlines. You'll notice it when you ask them something real. You'll see it in their smirk. After you try to get close, you say, I miss you. They reply, wow, you're obsessed. You tell them, that hurt me. They grin. Guess I'm consistent, huh? They turn the moment into a skit. Because it's easier to joke than to explain, easier to laugh than to feel. And for a moment, it works. The tension drops. You laugh. They laugh. And the moment of truth, the one that could have opened something real, passes by safely. But here's the cost. Every joke builds distance. Every punchline adds another wall, until the only part of them you can reach is the performer, not the person. Because for the avoidant, connection feels like exposure, and humor becomes the stage lighting that blinds everyone from what's really happening inside. If you look closer, though, you'll notice something. The moments they're the funniest are often the moments they're the most afraid. Right after a disagreement, right before you ask for clarity, right when you start getting too close. That's when the jokes get louder, the teasing sharper, the self-deprecation heavier. They'll say things like, don't fall in love with me. I'm broken. Therapy? Me? I'll just tell my therapist jokes. Feelings? No thanks, I'm allergic. And you laugh. But somewhere deep down, you feel that sting. Because you know the truth. These aren't just jokes. They're confessions, disguised as comedy. They tell the truth, in ways they think you won't take seriously. Because if you did, if you really listened, you'd hear how much pain lives inside their laughter. When they say, I'm bad at love, they mean, I'm scared to lose control. When they joke, I push people away, they mean, I was taught closeness isn't safe. When they laugh, I'll die alone with my dog, they mean, I've already felt alone my whole life. Their humor is full of quiet truths, but they use the sound of laughter to keep those truths from echoing too loudly. It's their way of managing the unbearable, Because vulnerability feels like a cliff they're not ready to stand on. So they joke instead. They hide behind charm. They smile when it hurts. And the world applauds them for it. Everyone says, "You're so funny," not realizing it's the same thing people once said. Right before they walked away, they learned that being funny keeps people entertained, but not close, keeps them liked, but not known. And deep inside, that becomes the tragedy of the avoidance humor. Because while everyone is laughing, no one's listening. No one sees how their smile trembles for a second too long, how their laugh trails off when the room quiets, how their eyes never fully meet yours when they say something that almost sounds real. Humor becomes the mask that smiles back, a way to belong without being touched, to connect without being known, to exist in love without ever feeling safe enough to stay. The comedy of control. Humor is not just about laughter, it's about control. The avoidant doesn't just use humor to mask pain, they use it to steer the emotional climate, to make sure the moment never gets too close, too raw, too unpredictable. Because underneath the jokes is a deep need to manage emotional risk. If they can make you laugh, then they don't have to feel. If they can set the tone of the conversation, they never have to sit in the discomfort of vulnerability. That's the secret function of their humor. It's not just expression, it's regulation. They regulate you, they regulate themselves. And in doing so, they stay in control of what emotions are allowed in the room. Notice this. They're the ones who decide when things get too serious. They sense it, the shift in tone, the gravity of a real question, the silence that demands truth. And then, right on cue, they throw in a joke, something light, something sarcastic, something perfectly timed to break the tension. It feels playful, but it's really a coded message. Don't go there. Don't make me go there. They know humor disarms people. It makes the heavy feel light, the vulnerable feel manageable. It's a form of redirection so subtle that even they might not know they're doing it. Because to them, emotional control is safety. To feel out of control, to feel too exposed, too dependent, too open. That's the emotional equivalent of drowning. So humor becomes the life raft, a floating device they never learn to let go of. And it's not just with you. It's in every corner of their life. At work, they're the witty one in meetings, quick with comebacks, never caught off guard. With friends, they're the storyteller, always making others laugh, rarely letting anyone ask them the real questions. Even when they talk about pain, they turn it into entertainment. Their heartbreaks become stories. Their trauma becomes stand-up material. Their loneliness gets polished into something charming. Because if it's funny, it's not threatening. If it's funny, they're still in control. And when you love someone like this, you start to notice a pattern. You'll see how they joke about things that aren't funny. You'll hear them laugh about abandonment, mock their own emotions, or tease you for needing reassurance. But every time you try to address it, they retreat behind the same line. Relax, I was just kidding. It's not that they're cruel. It's that joking is their safety exit. It's how they escape when the conversation gets too real. Because if you take the joke seriously, you threaten their armor. You shine light on the parts of them they've worked their entire life to keep in the dark. So when they say, relax, what they really mean is, please don't see me. Because if you do, if you look too closely, they'll have to confront the truth that all those jokes are protecting. And that truth is terrifying, that they're not as detached as they pretend, that they feel more than they show. That humor was never just about being funny. It was about survival. You can tell by what they don't joke about, too. There's a small set of topics that make their voice change, something they won't make light of. Moments when the humor fades for just a second. before they bring it back again. Those are the pressure points, the parts of their story that are still too close to the bone. When the laughter breaks for a moment, you see it, the exhaustion, the microsecond of grief, the part of them that's tired of pretending. But then they reset, the smile returns, and they hide behind the joke again, like slipping back into armor. The avoidance humor isn't spontaneous. It's a defense mechanism so finely tuned. It runs automatically. They don't even think. They just deflect. They make you laugh before you can make them feel. This is why their relationships often feel lopsided. You open up, you go deep, and they respond with a punchline. You reveal your pain, and they lighten it up. You might think they're minimizing your emotions, but often they're trying to minimize their own. Because hearing you be vulnerable activates something in them. It reminds them of feelings they've buried: helplessness, shame, fear of loss, things they never learned to process safely. So they convert the raw into the ridiculous. They turn what's heavy into something they can carry by laughing at it. They're not mocking you. They're running from what your honesty awakens in them. They're saying, if I can make this funny, it won't hurt as much. But the irony is, the more they use humor to stay in control, the less control they actually have. Because eventually, the mask becomes automatic. The performance takes over. They forget where the real self ends, and the funny self begins. Even their loneliness becomes scripted. They joke about being hard to love, then secretly ache when people believe them. They laugh about being too independent, but inside they're terrified that no one will stay. Humor is how they reject rejection before it happens, how they beat you to the punch. They'll make a joke about being distant, so you won't accuse them of it. They'll mock their own flaws, so you won't get the chance to criticize them first. They'll tease you before you can threaten their autonomy. It's all a choreography of protection. Every quip, every smirk, every "I was joking" is part of a dance they've mastered, one that keeps them emotionally one step ahead. But the truth hiding underneath all that cleverness is this: they're exhausted, because control takes energy, and laughter that hides pain isn't joy, it's work. Behind every perfectly timed line is a body that never relaxes, a nervous system that's always scanning for danger, a mind that equates control with safety. They can't stop being funny, not because they love it, but because without it, they feel naked. Humor becomes their currency of belonging. It's how they buy acceptance, without ever having to reveal their truth. They think, if I keep everyone laughing, no one will leave. If I stay light, no one will see the dark. But the tragedy is, humor can only connect so far. You can't build intimacy on irony. You can't heal from pain. You refuse to name. So they end up surrounded by people, but still alone. Admired, but not known. Loved for the performance, but not the person. And deep down, they know it. They know every joke keeps them safe, but also keeps them unseen. Because to be truly seen, they'd have to stop performing. They'd have to surrender control. They'd have to risk being taken seriously. And that, to the avoidant, is the scariest punchline of all. When the laughter stops, what breaks the mask? There comes a moment when even the strongest defense cracks. Not because they want it to, but because no human being can carry two identities forever: the one that hides and the one that aches to be seen. For the avoidant, that moment is terrifying because it's the silence after laughter fades, the stillness after they've run out of jokes, the second when no one's laughing back, and there's nowhere left to hide. It's usually small. It doesn't announce itself. It's not dramatic or loud. It happens in a quiet kitchen, at 2 a.m., when the world feels too still, or mid-conversation with someone. Who doesn't take the bait? Who doesn't laugh when they deflect? And suddenly, the joke doesn't work anymore. It lands flat. It echoes in the space between them, like something misplaced. That's when the mask starts to slip. You see it in their eyes. A flicker of something unguarded. A flash of grief. They quickly cover with another smirk. But you saw it. And they know you saw it. This is the turning point. Because once you've seen behind the humor, they can't unknow that you did. And for someone avoidant, being seen is both the deepest longing and the greatest fear. They've spent years mastering the art of emotional camouflage. They've learned to hide pain behind confidence, fear behind sarcasm, and loneliness behind charm. But masks have weight, and after a while, even the strongest starts to slip. You'll notice it when they go quiet after making you laugh, when they zone out for a split second, their body still, their eyes somewhere far away. That's not boredom. That's the cost of pretending. Because keeping everything light means carrying everything alone. And deep down, they know it's not sustainable. Humor can numb you for a while, but it can't heal you. You can joke about pain, but the body still remembers it. The nervous system still flinches when someone gets too close. That's why avoidants often crash. After moments of high social charm, after being the funny one for hours, they retreat. They disappear for days. They need distance to recover, not just from people, but from themselves. Because every laugh they evoke costs a little piece of energy they never learned how to restore. You'll hear them say things like, I just need some space, or I'm fine, just tired. But what they really mean is, I can't keep performing right now. I'm worn out from pretending everything's okay. When the laughter stops, what's left is the silence they've been trying to avoid. And in that silence lives truth. Truth they've buried so deep, they've mistaken it for personality. Truth like, I'm scared to need someone. I don't know how to let people stay. I'm terrified that if I show who I am, I'll lose the little love I have. That silence is their reckoning. It's the place where jokes no longer work, and control begins to crumble. Some reach that point in heartbreak, others in therapy, some after losing someone who saw through them and walked away, not in anger, but in sadness, because nothing cuts deeper for the avoidant than being seen and still left behind. It confirms their fear that even their best mask wasn't enough to keep them safe. So they double down. They rebuild the wall. They swear never to open up again. But there's another group, a quieter group, who, in that silence, start to listen. They notice how heavy the armor feels. They realize the jokes don't land like they used to. They sense that laughter without connection doesn't heal anything anymore. That's where healing begins, in the exhaustion of pretending, the moment they get tired of being the funny one, the moment they stop finding relief in irony, the moment they want something real, even if it's terrifying, because humor kept them safe, but it also kept them lonely, and they start to feel it, the loneliness beneath laughter, the ache that never goes away, no matter how hard they try to laugh it off. Sometimes, this realization comes through someone who refuses to play the game, someone who listens past the jokes, who doesn't get distracted by charm, who says, I know that was a joke, but what did you really mean by that? And for a second, they freeze, because no one's ever asked, no one's ever paused long enough to challenge the act. That's when something shifts. They look away. They make another joke, but it falls flat. They feel the lump in their throat, the sting behind their eyes. Their nervous system flares. This is danger, it screams. But a small voice underneath whispers, this might be safety. That's the contradiction of healing for the avoidant. What feels unsafe? is often what's finally safe. The silence that used to terrify them now holds peace. The vulnerability that once felt dangerous now starts to feel real. But to reach it, they have to stop running. They have to stop performing. They have to risk being serious. And that's hard for someone who's built their identity on being unbothered, funny, detached. It feels like losing control. It feels like death. But it's not death, it's rebirth. Because beneath all that humor is a human being who was once told that their emotions were too much. A child who learned that silence was safer than truth. A person who discovered that laughter could protect them from being punished for feeling. That's who's behind the mask. Not a manipulator, not a cold person, but someone who learned to survive by being the entertainer in their own pain. They became the comic relief in a story they never felt safe living. So when the laughter stops, it's not failure, it's awakening. It's the nervous system saying, I can't keep running from myself. And the moment they stop running, even for a second, they meet themselves for the first time. They feel what they've been avoiding: sadness, fear, longing, grief. And it hurts. It hurts like hell. But it's clean pain. It's honest. It's real. It's the first feeling that isn't filtered through irony. And when they let themselves cry, or sit in silence, or admit, I don't have it all together, something profound happens. They start to rebuild trust, not with others, but with themselves. Because healing for the avoidant isn't about suddenly becoming open and emotional. It's about feeling safe enough to stop using humor as armor, to trust that being seen won't destroy them. That's when humor starts to change. It becomes lighter, warmer, less defensive, less about hiding, more about connecting. They start to laugh with people instead of in front of them. They stop needing to be the funniest person in the room. They stop performing because for the first time, they realize they don't need to earn comfort through charm. They can just be. They can just say, I'm not okay today, without turning it into a bit. They can let someone hold silence with them without panicking to fill it. That's what it means when the laughter stops. Not that they've lost themselves, but that they've finally found the courage to show who they are when they're not being funny. It's a slow unraveling, but it's beautiful because behind every joke was a story waiting to be told. Behind every laugh was a longing to be understood. And once they realize they can still be loved without performing, humor becomes what it was meant to be: not a wall, but a bridge. The moment humor turns into healing, there's a quiet moment in every avoidance journey, a shift so subtle you could miss it if you weren't really looking. It's the moment humor stops being armor and starts becoming honesty. Not the kind of honesty that explodes, but the kind that exhales. It happens when they tell a story and don't flinch when it gets real, when they laugh. But this time, they don't use the laugh to cover what hurts. They use it to release it. That's the moment humor turns into healing. Because humor, at its root, is not the enemy. It's a language, a bridge between pain and meaning. The avoidant just learned to speak it in survival. But when they begin to heal, the same humor that once hid them starts to free them. They begin to laugh with their pain, not at it. They start saying things like, yeah, I used to push people away, and I probably still do sometimes, but I'm working on it. And that sentence, though it sounds simple, is huge, because for someone who used humor to deny vulnerability, to use it now, to express it, is a quiet revolution. It means they're no longer using laughter to run. They're using it to stay. You'll notice the difference. Their jokes become warmer, more grounded, less about control, more about connection. They still tease. They still play. But there's softness behind it now, not distance, because they've started to see that humor doesn't have to be a disguise for pain. It can be a doorway into truth, a safe entry point into conversations they once avoided. I joke a lot when I'm uncomfortable. They might say, I guess that's my nervous system trying to keep me safe. That right there is healing, not perfection, not transformation overnight, but awareness, gentle, honest awareness. Because humor without awareness is a wall, but humor with awareness is wisdom. It's the same impulse, expressed differently. When the avoidant starts healing, their nervous system still remembers the instinct to deflect. But now they notice it. They'll catch themselves mid joke, pause, and say, actually, that's not funny. That hurt. And that's the moment you know something's changed. Because that pause is everything. That pause means they're no longer choosing automatic protection over truth. They're choosing presence. They're choosing themselves. It's not easy. It takes courage to break a lifelong pattern of self protection disguised as humor. But the moment they do, they discover something they never expected. Connection feels lighter than pretending ever did. The very thing they thought would destroy them, being real, being open, being unfiltered, turns out to be the thing that saves them. Because humor can still exist in healed space. It just changes its tone. It stops being a weapon and becomes a rhythm, a heartbeat between two people who see each other. You'll hear it in conversations that used to be guarded. They'll tell you about their childhood and laugh, not because they're minimizing it, but because they've made peace with it. They can say, yeah, I used to act like I didn't care about anyone, and smile, not because they're proud, but because they've forgiven that version of themselves. That's what healing does. It transforms shame into story. It gives context to the character. It softens the judgment. They stop needing to prove that they're fine. They stop needing every moment to be light. And in that space, humor becomes what it was always meant to be, a human way of surviving, a release valve, a signal of resilience. Healing doesn't erase the joke, it gives it new meaning. The avoidant learns that laughter doesn't have to hide emotion, it can hold it, it can sit beside pain without pretending it's not there. That's the balance of emotional maturity, to laugh and to feel, to joke and to stay open. It's no longer, I'm funny, so I don't have to be vulnerable. It becomes, I can be funny and vulnerable at the same time. That shift is enormous because it means they've rewritten the emotional script that once controlled them. They've gone from survival humor to soulful humor, from don't get too close to let's laugh together. And through that evolution, something else happens. Trust begins to grow. People start feeling safe around them, not because they're funny, but because they're real, because they can share lightness without denying depth. You can tell when an avoidant has begun to heal by the way their humor feels different. It doesn't sting. It doesn't aim to distract. It invites you in. It feels like, I see you, and I see myself too. That's what authenticity sounds like when it finds its voice. Sometimes this change begins in therapy. Sometimes it begins in heartbreak. Sometimes it begins alone, when they get tired of always being the one who has to make others laugh, just to feel accepted. Healing often begins in exhaustion, when the mask becomes too heavy to wear, and they whisper, I don't want to perform anymore. From that whisper comes a quiet kind of courage, the courage to say, I'm not okay, but I'm still here. And that's when the heart softens. They begin to realize they don't have to choose between being strong and being human. They can be both. They can laugh and still cry later. They can joke and still mean what they say. They can be light and still carry depth. The avoidance healing is not about abandoning humor. It's about reclaiming it, taking back the laughter from fear's control, turning it from armor into art. Because humor is sacred when it's rooted in truth. It's medicine when it connects rather than conceals. When the avoidant finally reaches this space, they begin to experience laughter differently. It's no longer adrenaline fueled. It's nervous system calm. It's not a cover up. It's connection. They find themselves laughing with someone and realizing they're not scanning for danger. They're not waiting for rejection. They're just there, present, at ease, safe. And that's when humor becomes the language of healing. Because laughter born in safety does something remarkable. It tells the nervous system, you're safe now. It reprograms the body to associate connection with calm, not danger. It bridges the gap between emotional intimacy and regulation. For the avoidant, this is everything. It means they no longer have to choose between laughter and love. They can have both. They can be playful and still be present. They can be funny without needing to hide. This is the mature stage of humor, when it doesn't run from vulnerability, but walks beside it. And it's beautiful to witness. You can see it in their posture, hear it in their tone, feel it in their energy. There's less tension, less control, more life. They start saying things like, I used to make fun of everything because I didn't know how to feel. And they laugh, not to dismiss, but to acknowledge. That's emotional mastery. It's not about never joking again. It's about letting humor become an honest expression of humanity, not a strategy for distance. When they reach that level, their relationships change too. People around them feel closer. Conversations become more balanced. There's laughter and silence, and both feel okay. Because real intimacy isn't built on constant seriousness or constant joking. It's built on rhythm. The rhythm between laughter and truth, between playfulness and honesty. The avoidant, once terrified of that rhythm, now learns to dance with it. And the beauty of it all, they start laughing differently. Their laugh sounds freer, like it's coming from somewhere deeper, not rehearsed, not forced, but real. And when you see that happen, when their laughter finally matches their heart, you realize something extraordinary. Healing didn't take away their humor. It gave it meaning. It gave it soul. Because humor that comes from healing isn't about running from pain. It's about honoring the fact that you survived it. It's saying, yes, that was hard, and I can still smile. It's the sound of resilience, finding its joy again, what it means to be loved beyond the joke. There comes a point when even the funniest avoidant runs out of punchlines, not because they've stopped being witty, but because they've run out of places to hide. And that's the moment love becomes terrifying and sacred all at once. Because real love, the kind that stays after the performance, isn't laughing at them. It's waiting for them. It's the moment someone looks at them. After the joke, after the sarcasm, after the I'm fine, and doesn't move. They just stay. No laughter required. No act to maintain. Just presence. And for the avoidant, that's revolutionary. Because their entire identity was built on control, on keeping the narrative light enough to avoid emotional gravity. They learned early that if they could make others laugh, they could make themselves safe. But love doesn't play by those rules. Love doesn't need the performance. It wants the person. It wants the real them. Awkward pauses, trembling hands, uneven voice. Love wants the silence between the jokes. And that silence is where everything begins to heal. Because the avoidant has always believed they were loved for their composure, for being funny, capable, unfazed. But being loved beyond the joke means being loved without earning it, without the punchline, without the act. It's being loved when they can't make anyone laugh, when they're just human. And that's the one thing they never thought they could be safely. To the avoidant, humor was currency, a way to buy approval without showing need. But when someone comes along who doesn't need the comedy, who isn't afraid of the stillness underneath, the entire nervous system goes into alert because this love feels unfamiliar, unnegotiated, unearned, and yet it feels right. At first, they resist it. They test it by pulling away, by minimizing their emotions, by pretending they don't care. But the one who truly sees them doesn't chase or collapse. They stay grounded. They know the joke isn't rejection, it's protection. And when the avoidant realizes that love hasn't vanished, just because they dropped the mask, something inside them shifts. The joke stops being a defense and becomes an expression. They start learning that they can be funny and real, that they can be lighthearted without being avoidant. That laughter can be safe, not strategic. That's what it means to be loved beyond the joke. It means being loved in the moments where the humor fades and the truth breathes through. It's when they say, I don't know how to do this. And the other person says, that's okay. We'll learn together. It's when they cry mid-laugh and no one tells them to choose between the two. It's when they say something honest, something that once would have been covered by a joke. And instead of discomfort, they find warmth. Being loved beyond the joke teaches the avoidant something profound. They were never hard to love. They were just never loved. In a language that didn't require pretending, humor was the language they spoke, because it was the only one that didn't get punished. But love, real love, teaches them a new one, the language of presence. And presence, for someone who's always escaped emotion, feels like fire at first. It burns, it exposes, it disarms, but slowly, it becomes light. They begin to associate closeness, not with danger, but with safety. Their laughter changes. It comes from the belly, not the throat. Their eyes stop scanning for exits. Their words soften. Their body relaxes. Because for the first time, they're not laughing to survive. They're laughing to connect. And connection, for the avoidant, is the ultimate risk and the ultimate reward. They've spent years believing they were safer behind the walls of wit. But walls can't hold love. They only echo it. And eventually, the avoidant gets tired of listening to their own echoes. That's when love walks in and stays, not to fix them, not to pry, just to witness, to show them that vulnerability doesn't always end in rejection, that laughter and pain can coexist in the same sentence. That being seen isn't something to fear, it's something to receive. This kind of love doesn't demand they stop being funny. It simply asks that they stop using funny to disappear. Because the truth is, the avoidance humor is beautiful. It's creative, intelligent, magnetic. It's how they bring light into heavy rooms. But it was never meant to replace their truth. When they finally let themselves be loved beyond it, their humor expands. It deepens. It becomes empathy in motion. It becomes a shared heartbeat. They can make someone laugh and follow it up with, but seriously, that really hurt me. They can go from a joke to a confession, and neither one feels like betrayal, because now both are real, both are safe. This is the sacred moment of integration, when the performer meets the person, when the laughter that once hid the wound becomes the laughter that helps it heal. And love, Real, grounded love is the mirror that makes that possible. It reflects not the mask, but the human beneath it. And when the avoidant finally sees themselves through the eyes of someone who doesn't flinch, they realize something that changes everything. They were never unfeeling. They were just unreceived. Their humor was never cruelty. It was communication, spoken in the only dialect safety allowed. But now, they have someone who understands that dialect and gently translates it back into truth. And that's what love beyond the joke looks like. It doesn't punish the defense. It honors the story behind it. It sees the fear and meets it with softness. It sees the avoidance and meets it with patience. Until one day, the avoidant doesn't have to perform anymore. They start to smile, not because they have to, but because they genuinely feel it. They start to laugh, not to fill silence, but because they're fully present in it. They start to connect, not out of duty, but out of desire. And that's when humor becomes love's companion, not its cover. Because love doesn't kill humor, it restores it. It returns it to innocence, to joy, the kind of laughter that doesn't have to prove anything, that doesn't hide anything, that just exists. Soft, free, real. And maybe that's the full circle of the avoidance journey, to realize that their greatest defense was never wrong. It was just misplaced. Humor was never the problem. It was the symptom. And when they heal, they don't lose that part of themselves. They integrate it. They take back their lightness and let it live beside their depth. They laugh again. But this time, they're not laughing to run. They're laughing because they finally stopped. And for the first time in a long time, they realize something simple, something life-changing. They don't have to be funny to be loved. They just have to be.